Okay, so the question of how does a writing class scale when it goes online? I suppose that if you asked the average writing instructor what they thought was an ideal number for a conventional face-to-face class, that most would say something like 15. 15 students is a good number for having class discussion. It's a good number for creating an intimate sense of community that is good when you're, moving towards having workshops and things like that. And most importantly, it's good for the workload of the instructor, him or herself. Why is writing such a labor-intensive writing instruction such a labor-intensive activity? Well, writing is a labor-intensive activity as well. And when you're grading writing and responding to writing, of course, you're doing a lot of writing yourself. And so there is the grading, and then there's the responding to drafts and the conferencing with students. And so all of that makes for a fairly labor-intensive form of teaching, which is why we are always trying to keep the size of the writing class down to something like 15, although at Cortland, our freshman first-year composition courses are capped at 22, and our writing intensive courses, which we offer across the curriculum, are capped at 25. And so still, though, the premise is really that the level of labor involved in grading, responding to writing, requires a smaller class. So when we see classes getting bigger, usually it's some sort of cost-cutting measure or something like that, and typically writing instructors are opposed to any kind of increase in class size. So with the online course, is there any reason to increase class size? Well, first of all, I think that when you're thinking, about the first two reasons that I had stated for having an online class, for the size of the class being 15, they were one that's good for class discussion, and two, creates a sense of intimacy. Well, how do those things translate into the online environment? First of all, I think that an online discussion probably certainly works better with more students than 15. And so it's hard to say exactly how many students you need to have a really dynamic discussion. What's the turning point there, the tipping point? But I would say that you would want to have 10, 15 posts a day and an online discussion. Not that everyone's reading everything, but you'd want to have at least that many. So I would think, or even more. So I would think that if you had, say, 30 students in an online class, that you would have then, maybe if you asked them to post twice a week or 3 times a week, if you get 60 or 90 posts, and you're still not quite there. If you had, say, 60 students posting twice a week, then you have 120 posts, then suddenly you have something that is closer to the kind of dynamic that you may want to have. Of course, maybe you want people posting more than twice a week. So it really depends. But in terms of how often people are posting, obviously. But I think that certainly 15 is too small. And then in terms of the second question, the question of intimacy, obviously that works very differently in an online environment. I wouldn't say that you can't have a sense of intimacy. I would just say that you don't have this experience of sitting in a large classroom, surrounded by a large group of students, feeling like a number in an online course, regardless of how many people are in it. The intimacy, an experience of intimacy, is not really related to the number of users that are involved. You can feel like you're having an intimate experience on MySpace, and that's millions and millions of people. So in terms of those questions, I think that the writing class certainly can scale. The only question then becomes, the question of labor and the question of responding to writing. which again is the fundamental question, or the main thing that governs the size of the course. And so here I think we come to something that is more revolutionary or questionable, I guess, depending upon how you think about it. But it has to do with rethinking the way that we imagine how writing gets taught. Because certainly the whole equation of saying that writing instruction is labor intensive because the professor or instructor needs to respond to all the student writing is largely hinged on the premise that no one else is reading it. Even in a workshop environment, you might have 2 or 3 other students that read a draft in a class. Maybe you do more, but generally speaking, that's probably what would be typical. And so, yes, if the student's going to get any kind of feedback, that feedback is only going to come from the teacher. And of course, the teacher is the one who has the authority to give feedback, even in a workshop. That seems to be the way that it often plays out. So it's so important, right, for the teacher to spend all of his or her time giving this detailed feedback, which, as far as I've ever seen in terms of research, the more you write, the less effect it has, and there's quickly a law of diminishing returns there in terms of feedback. But that has never seemed to really deter people from writing more and more and more, and I'll include myself in that category. But when you're looking in an online space, certainly there's no reason why writing should have to be limited so much in terms of audience. I mean, for one thing, you could write in a public space, and then you could have a very large audience potentially. But certainly you could have an audience that's as large as the class itself for everything that students write. And so there's no real need for the professor to be giving all this detailed feedback and to even read everything that gets written by the students, and certainly not to grade it or to comment on it extensively. And so then, if you can say that I'm going to take a certain percentage of the work of the students and I'm going to grade it in a very detailed way, and I'm going to give them this extensive kind of feedback that's going to give me the opportunity to do the kind of teaching that I really know how to do when I comment on students' papers. So I can take a certain segment of the class writing and do that on it. And then the rest of the writing becomes more like writing in the real world, where people respond to it because they want to respond to it, and because it's part of a conversation that they're invested in, and perhaps because they're required to participate in the conversation. I mean, there's always that part of any class. But hopefully, there's a sense of investment in the community that you can create in your online class. And so then you can say, well, if in a conventional class I've got 15 students and they all write, say 20 pages of writing, and maybe not that much. Maybe it's 15 pages of writing, but they all write drafts. So one draft that I read, and then I read their final version. So I read 30 pages of each student's writing that I'm doing this kind of extensive commenting on. And so that's 450 pages of student writing that I'm doing all this commenting on. So let's say that I had 30 students and I did that on 7 pages of each of their pieces of writing, 2 assignments instead of 4 that I did that level of commenting on. And then the rest of it is more done through this kind of dynamic of students reading and commenting and conversing and so on in a community, and that there's something to be learned there, and there's a way to teach there that you can kind of see what people write, and then you can point out and say, aha, there is something that Johnny wrote about Susie's paper that or post or whatever, and here we can see this kind of thing going on. Here's talking about audience awareness or purpose or genre or whatever it is that we want to say. This is what someone's responding to. So that's the idea, that you don't have to rely so much on yourself doing all the work. Now, I don't know if that makes for good news or bad news, right? That hypothetically, by that argument, we could maybe teach twice as many students in an online environment, and not only could we, are we capable of doing it, but maybe it would actually be more effective to do it that way, or at least it would be more effective to teach 30 students in an online class than it would be to teach 15 students in an online class. And, when I think about this, I certainly see, my wife teaches some online classes, freshman composition classes, and she's done it more than I have, actually. And, she might teach 2 of them in the same semester, and she's got 2 sections, and the way the college wants to set it up, each of the sections is kept separate from the other. And that makes no sense to me. Why not have, instead of 25 students in one place having, a discussion about this reading, and then 25 students in another space, completely separate and inaccessible to the first group, having a conversation about the same reading? Why not have all 50 students talking together? Wouldn't that make so much more sense? And if if that makes sense that way, then at what point do you just say, well, that's one class? Now, obviously, the limit is that, at some point there is an amount of work that I would have to do, or any professor would have to do, in responding to readings and managing the course and so on. And so the course can only scale so far, depending upon how you think about it. But certainly, it seems to me that we can't just, knee-jerk say that an online course should have the same kind of cap as a face-to-face class.